Hello friends, welcome back. Now when we type the city name here and click on check whether the city will be logged. So this code is right here. We just console log the city which the user has typed and then click the select button. Now we just console log the city which the user has typed and then click the check weather button. But what we want to do is actually we want to fetch the weather from the current city from the API. In order to do that, we are going to use useFetch hook, which we have written previously. But now let's write it again in this project too. So in the source folder, we will create one more folder with the name hooks. And in this folder, we will create a file with the name useFetch.js. And here I will write RAFCE and press tab. And here we will pass the URL and then we need to import useState and useFetch. So here we need to write useState and useEffect. Sorry, useState and useEffect, not useFetch. And then we need to create couple of state variables. So let's create them now. Let's create the data variable. So here I will write, so first we need to write useState and the initial value will be null, and this useState will return an array with two elements. So the first element will be state variable which is data, and the second one is setter function, so set data, and we need to assign it to a variable keyword, so const. Now let's create another useState. So useState and initial value will be null, which will return an array with two elements. So the first is the state variable which is error, and second is the setter function, so set error, and we need to assign it to a variable keyword, so const. And let's create the third one, so const, and in the array we have two elements. So the first one is in progress and the second one is set in progress, and which is equal to useState and initial value is false. Let's save this. Now let's create a useEffect function. So here I will create useEffect function, so useEffect, and inside this we will pass an anonymous function which is an arrow function, and then we need to call set in progress and we need to set it to true because we are starting the fetch. So that is why we want to set the in progress to be true. Now let's save this file. Now let's call the fetch API. So fetch, and here we need to take the URL and we get the URL from this property. So here let's pass the URL and then we can get a response. First we want to extract the body of response. We can do this by calling the JSON method, and then what we want to do is we want to set data, and the body has been extracted, and first we want to set the in progress to be false, so set in progress which needs to be false. Let's save this. We have set in progress to be false since we have received our data, and now let's set the data, set data to be data. Let's save this file. Now let's create a catch block in case there is an error. So let's call the property error and let's call set in progress again. So set in progress, and we need to set it to false, and let's set the error to be error, and let's save this file. And now we need to return the state variable so it can be accessed by the user. So here we need to return the state variable, so let's remove this, and here we need to return the state variables which are data, error, and in progress. Let's save this file. Now let's go to app.js and we need to import useFetch hook. So here we need to write import useFetch from dot slash hooks slash useFetch. Let's save this, and here Here we need to extract the variable, so const, and in curly braces we will extract the variables which are data, error, and in progress, which is equal to use fetch. Let's save this. So the current fetch is same what we did in previous example when we learn about how to create our custom hook. But now this is not the exact behavior we want to do, because what we did back is we just passed the URL. Sorry, here we need to put round brackets. So first, so previously what we did is we passed the URL here and that was it. But now what we want is we want to call the API every time this button is clicked. And we want to call the API to get the weather from the new city. But I can't say use fetch and pass this URL since we want to store the data and run in progress as the state of app. So I can't put it in this scope, otherwise they will be gone. So what I can do is I have to modify this use fetch function. And how do we modify this? First, we don't want to pass this URL. So let's remove this URL. So we don't want to pass this URL now because now we don't know what the URL will be. We only want to call the use fetch when the button has clicked. So basically we want to create a state variable for the URL. So first what I wanted to do is I wanted to modify the URL to initial URL. So initial URL. And now let's create the state variable for URL. So const, and here we need to write URL, and the setter function is set URL, which is equal to use state, and the initial value will be initial URL. Let's save this, and now we need to modify the use effect function since we will be dependent on the URL of the state. So here I need to pass a second argument which is URL. So here I need to pass the URL as the second argument as a dependency. Now we need to return set URL. So here we need to return set URL, and let's save this. Now it can set from the outside because when the URL is set, it will trigger the use effect to be run, and then we can fetch the API again. So now I am exporting the set URL here, but now let's think how will the use effect work, because the first time URL might be null. So let's put a check here. If URL is null, if the URL is null, then simply return. So I don't want to fetch anything. Now let's go back, let's save this file, and now let's go back to app.js, and here instead of console log I want to call set URL. And where this set URL came from, it came from this use effect hook. So set URL, and inside this I will pass the URL. So what is the URL? So let's go back to the API, and so this is the URL. So let's copy this and let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and here I will paste the URL, and I will use the backtick key because I want to pass some string interpolation. So here I'll pass the backtick key. So as you remember, we have exported the base URL and API key. So let's import the API key and base URL. So here we need to write import API key and base URL from dot slash config, and let's save this file. So instead of this URL, we will write dollar curly braces, and here I'll write base URL, and let's close the curly braces. And here instead of this key, I will write dollar curly braces and API key. And here instead of Mumbai, I will remove this and I will write dollar curly braces, and I will pass this city. So city, because we don't want every time to fetch Mumbai. We want to fetch the weather from city when which the user has set. So we need to remove that Mumbai, and we need to add this city. Now let's save this, and now let's console log data. So here I'll write console dot log, and we will console the data. So let's save this, and now let's go to the browser and let me refresh it. And here let's write Mumbai, and let's click on check weather. So here as you can see, we have logged the data. So this is the response from the real API. Now let's say if I modify this Mumbai and if I type New York, And if I click on check weather, so let me minimize this and let's check weather. So as you can see, we get the data of New York, but why did it printed so many times? So as you can see, it printed so many times. If I go to use fetch, we always modify many things. Oh, sorry, here the spelling is incorrect, so error. So we always modify many things. So when there is a response, we set in progress. And when this is set to true, just remember it will just trigger a state update, not only here, but in the users also, which means that the data will be console log. So this is why you can see multiple console logs every time when we click on check weather. So this is it for this video, and if you have not subscribed to my channel, then please subscribe and I'll see you in the next video. Till then, take care and bye bye.